Good evening. Imagine waking up tomorrow to find your portfolio had collapsed by 20 or 30%. The headlines are shouting black swan event, your capital evaporating, yet you sleep soundly. Why? Because you built your portfolio not only for growth, but for protection. Most people build portfolios to perform well during good times. They chase returns, they follow trends, and they assume the future will more or less resemble the past. But the world doesn't work that way. Economies move in cycles, debt builds up, politics get messy, geopolitical tensions flare, and when something breaks, it often breaks fast. That's when people look around and wonder, where did all the money go? But by then, it's too late to protect yourself. Protection, if it's going to work, must be established before the storm hits. That's why every sound portfolio must include a meaningful allocation to assets that behave differently from the rest, assets that are structured to do well when everything else is falling apart. I'm not talking about a few percentage points sprinkled here and there for the sake of diversification. I'm talking about a deliberate, strategic hedge, typically around 15% of the total portfolio, dedicated to protection. This isn't a guess. It's a result of studying how portfolios behave across economic regimes and stress periods, both in history and in real-time practice. Why 15%? Because it's enough to make a real difference when things go wrong, but not so much that it drags performance significantly during normal times. It's a number that's emerged from stress testing, from risk modeling, from looking at different environments. Stagflation, deflation, war, hyperinflation, and identifying how much cushion is required to prevent a total collapse in purchasing power and investor confidence. When you allocate too little, the hedge doesn't work when you need it most. When you allocate too much, you start sacrificing growth unnecessarily, but this hedge only works if it's real. It can't just be a few government bonds or a small cash position. In an environment where inflation is persistent and monetary policy is uncertain, traditional safe assets no longer provide the inverse correlation they once did. Bonds can go down with equities. Cash can be eroded by inflation. What you need are instruments or assets that are fundamentally uncorrelated with the rest of your portfolio. Things like gold, or certain cryptocurrencies, or even long-dated options that spike in value when volatility explodes. These aren't speculative positions. They're deliberate risk management tools. The key here is to focus on asymmetry, assets that may lose a bit in good times but gain a lot in bad times. That's what makes the 15% allocation so powerful. You're not trying to match or exceed the returns of equities or risk assets during bull markets. You're trying to ensure that when those assets drop by 30%, your hedge rises enough to keep the total portfolio stable, or better yet, gives you the capital to buy more of those risk assets at a discount. This also changes your psychology as an investor. When everyone else is panicking, you're thinking rationally. Why? Because your hedge is working. You have liquidity. You have optionality. You have time to make smart decisions. That's an incredibly valuable position to be in, not just financially, but emotionally. Over the long run, it's this kind of preparation that separates those who survive and thrive from those who merely react. The markets don't care if you're optimistic. They don't reward hope. They reward discipline, and a disciplined 15% allocation to a true hedge is not just a financial strategy. It's an acknowledgement that risk is real, and that prudence is not weakness. It's strength. In investing, the biggest damage rarely comes from small mistakes. It comes from the rare, severe events that most people don't see coming or choose not to prepare for. Markets tend to rise gradually but fall sharply. Years of gains can be wiped out in weeks, and yet most portfolios are built to perform well during the majority of the time, not for those few critical moments when everything falls apart. That's where tail, risk hedges come into play. They aren't designed to shine during calm markets. In fact, they often seem like a drag. But when the system breaks, they're what stands between survival and devastation. Tail, risk hedges are like fire insurance on a house. Most of the time, the house doesn't burn down and the premium feels like a waste. But when it does catch fire, the insurance is the only thing that matters. The cost you paid over the years suddenly looks trivial compared to what it saved you. And that's how tail, risk hedges function inside a portfolio. They often look inefficient, small negative returns, tracking error, and drag. But they're not there to compete with stocks or generate yield. They're there to protect the integrity of the portfolio during periods of extreme market dislocation. What makes tail, risk hedging so powerful is the asymmetry. A small allocation, properly structured, can generate massive payoffs when volatility spikes or markets crash. This isn't theoretical. It's happened repeatedly. Think back to the global financial crisis or to March 2020. Portfolios that included well-structured tail risk hedges had the ability not only to preserve value, but to grow while others collapsed. That gain isn't just for psychological comfort. It creates a strategic advantage. When others are forced to sell at the bottom, you're in a position to buy. You have liquidity when others don't. But none of this works if you give up on the hedge during quiet periods. That's where discipline is tested. People get complacent. They look at the consistent drag on performance from hedging strategies and start asking, do I really need this? That's like asking if you need a parachute just because the plane hasn't crashed yet. The drag is real, but it's the price of protection, and the longer a market goes without a tail event, the more likely people are to forget why the hedge was there in the first place. That's when portfolios are most vulnerable. There's also a misconception that hedging is about calling the timing of a crash. It's not. It's about recognizing that crashes happen, even if you can't predict when. Timing is luck. Preparation is skill. Tail, risk hedges are not placed because you expect disaster tomorrow. They're placed because you know that over a long enough horizon, the improbable becomes inevitable. If you stay in markets long enough without protection, eventually you'll get caught in something you can't escape. The best way to implement this strategy is with discipline and clarity. Choose instruments that offer convexity, where small movements in volatility or market levels lead to outsized gains in the hedge. Structure them in ways that balance cost and protection, like put spreads, deep out of the money options, or systematic volatility strategies. Keep the size reasonable. You don't need a massive allocation to get a meaningful effect during tail events. But you do need consistency. Ultimately, the goal of a tail risk hedge isn't to win every year, it's to stay in the game, to preserve capital during the moments when everyone else is losing theirs. Over time, those moments define the trajectory of your portfolio. The best returns often come not from chasing upside, but from avoiding the worst of the downside. That's where the true compounding happens, not just in performance, but in resilience. Every investment decision involves trade-offs. Every allocation you make is a choice between risks and rewards, costs and benefits, certainty and uncertainty. The best strategies recognize that not all risks are worth taking, and not all costs are worth avoiding. In the realm of hedging, this balance becomes even more delicate. It's not just about being protected, It's about being protected in a way that makes sense, where the price you pay for security doesn't erode the core objective of growth over time. The key lies in asymmetry. In a world of limited resources and unpredictable outcomes, the most intelligent moves are those where the potential upside significantly outweighs the downside. You don't hedge for the sake of symmetry. You hedge to give yourself disproportionate protection relative to the cost. You're not trying to eliminate all downside. You're trying to neutralize the tail risk that could irreparably damage your portfolio. When people look at hedging strategies, they often focus too much on the cost. They see the annual bleed from buying protection and wonder if it's worth it. They compare it to the performance of risk assets and feel like they're losing. But they're measuring the wrong thing. The value of a hedge isn't found in average returns. It's found in outcomes during extremes. That's where the cost-benefit equation flips. You pay small amounts consistently in order to avoid losing big all at once. It's about positioning yourself so that a relatively minor drag buys you a massive amount of flexibility and optionality when markets are in chaos. Not all hedges offer the same level of asymmetry. Some are linear. Some are expensive. Some simply mimic diversification rather than providing true convexity. The goal is to identify tools and structures that give you the most bang for your buck. That might mean buying long, dated out of the money options that are cheap when volatility is low but explode in value when volatility spikes. Or it could mean employing structured products that cap your downside while leaving some upside on the table. It could even mean rotating into uncorrelated assets when signals suggest stress is building. The tools vary, but the principle is the same. The protection should be inexpensive relative to what it delivers in a crisis. The benefit isn't just in reducing drawdowns, it's in the compounded advantage that comes from having capital when others don't. When markets sell off sharply, those with protection are not only cushioned, they're also positioned to deploy capital into discounted opportunities. That's the hidden value of a well-designed hedge. It's not static protection, it's dynamic offense, triggered at precisely the moments when others are forced to retreat. Of course, to make this work, you need a system. You need to think probabilistically, not emotionally. When hedges underperform during bull markets, as they often do, you need the discipline to stay with the strategy. Otherwise, you'll abandon it just before you need it most. The temptation to chase returns and cut dead weight from a portfolio is strongest when volatility is low. But that's also when the cost of hedging is lowest. That's when you lock in the asymmetry. So the question is not whether hedging is expensive. The question is whether it offers asymmetric payoff. When it does, it shifts the entire risk/reward balance of your portfolio. It creates resilience, it reduces fragility, and it gives you the confidence to remain fully invested, not because you're blind to risk, but because you've priced that risk in. That's the kind of thinking that lasts, not chasing what looks good now, but building for what's inevitable later. Most investors take comfort in diversification. They spread capital across stocks, bonds, sectors, geographies, even asset classes. They assume that by owning many things, they've lowered their risk. And on the surface, that appears to be true. During normal market conditions, diversification can smooth out returns, reduce volatility, and provide a sense of safety. But in the moments that matter most, the moments when markets are under real stress, diversification often fails to deliver what people expect. Correlations rise. Assets that were once considered uncorrelated begin to move in the same direction. And that direction is usually down. This is the problem with relying solely on diversification as a defense mechanism. It works until it doesn't. It gives the illusion of protection, but not the substance. The world is more interconnected than ever. Financial systems, economies, and asset classes move together because the underlying forces that drive them are increasingly linked. Central bank policies, global liquidity, credit cycles, these macro factors exert simultaneous pressure across the board. So when a real dislocation occurs, the typical diversified portfolio doesn't behave as expected. It doesn't cushion the blow. It participates in the fall. A well-constructed portfolio must go beyond diversification. It must incorporate strategies and assets that are specifically designed to respond differently when traditional components are under stress. This isn't about owning more things. It's about owning the right things, things that have a reliable tendency to zig when others zag. In other words, you need true non-correlation, not theoretical non-correlation. You need assets or positions that are driven by different economic outcomes, different growth assumptions, inflation expectations, monetary policies. Even within diversification, there's often a hidden concentration. Take a portfolio that holds global equities, corporate bonds, and real estate investment trusts. It may appear diversified, but the underlying exposures are heavily tied to growth and interest rates. If growth slows and rates rise, all of these assets can decline together. That's not resilience. That's disguised fragility. The solution is not to abandon diversification, but to reframe it, not as an end in itself, but as a starting point that must be supplemented by thoughtful hedging, true asymmetry, and strategic optionality. And this is where preparation matters more than prediction. No one can predict the next shock with consistency, whether it's inflation, deflation, geopolitical conflict, a credit event, or something we haven't seen before. But what can be done is to prepare a portfolio that's robust under multiple scenarios. That includes assets that thrive in inflationary regimes, positions that benefit from volatility or even tail, risk hedges that surge when equity markets collapse. These components don't just diversify. They transform the behavior of the portfolio when it's needed most. To build something resilient, you have to think in systems, not snapshots. You have to ask, what happens to my portfolio if inflation spikes? If growth collapses? If liquidity evaporates? And most importantly, what do all these scenarios do at the same time? Only by asking those uncomfortable questions can you uncover the vulnerabilities that diversification alone doesn't address. And only by acting on those insights can you build something that survives not just the average year, but the worst year. There is no perfect hedge, just like there is no perfect diversification. But there is such a thing as thoughtful design. A portfolio that can endure pressure, absorb shocks, and remain functional under duress. That's not just the result of spreading capital around. That's the result of understanding where the real risks are hiding and taking action before they strike. The strength of a portfolio isn't just in the assets it holds. It's in how it responds to change. Markets evolve. Economic environments shift. What works in one cycle may falter in the next. And yet, most portfolios are constructed and then left to drift, becoming unbalanced as certain assets outperform and others lag. Over time, this drift compounds. The portfolio no longer reflects the investor's true risk appetite or strategic intent. It becomes exposed in ways that aren't obvious until something breaks. That's why disciplined, dynamic rebalancing isn't just a tactical move. It's a core principle of sound portfolio management. At its essence, rebalancing is about returning the portfolio to its original design. It's a way to manage risk proactively, not reactively. When risk assets soar, they start to dominate the portfolio, increasing exposure to drawdowns. When defensive assets outperform, they can overweight stability at the cost of growth. Rebalancing forces the investor to sell what has become expensive and buy what has become cheap. That discipline, especially during emotionally charged moments, is what keeps the portfolio aligned with long-term objectives. But rebalancing isn't about rigidity. It's not a mechanical act done on a calendar date. It's about responding to shifts in valuation, risk, and correlation in a thoughtful way. That's where the dynamic part comes in. In stable times, small drifts can be tolerated, but during volatile periods, when correlations spike and volatility surges, maintaining strategic balance becomes essential. That may mean rebalancing more frequently or adjusting the way hedges are structured. The goal is always the same: protect the portfolio's integrity and position it for future opportunity. Hedging strategies in particular require careful attention. As market conditions change, so does the size and effectiveness of a hedge. A 15% allocation to a protective asset might shrink to 10% after a bull run or swell to 25% after a crash. Neither condition is ideal if left alone. Allowing hedges to overinflate reduces exposure to growth just when opportunity is highest. Letting them shrink to insignificance undermines their ability to protect. Discipline means trimming the winners even when they feel safe, and adding to the losers even when they feel risky. That's the uncomfortable trade-off that produces long-term stability. Dynamic rebalancing also provides a strategic edge in times of stress. When markets fall sharply and hedges rise, rebalancing allows an investor to shift profits from the hedge into risk assets at lower prices. That's not just protection, it's offense. It turns volatility into an opportunity, but it requires preparation. If you wait until panic sets in to make these decisions, emotion takes over and discipline disappears. That's why the rules need to be in place beforehand. The clarity of process is what enables calm amid chaos. It's easy to follow a strategy when things are going well. The test comes when markets are erratic, headlines are frightening, and everyone around you is acting irrationally. That's when discipline matters most. It's what allows you to keep your strategy intact, to act when others freeze, and to maintain a rational edge in an emotional environment. Without discipline, even the best portfolio design will eventually fail, not because the components were wrong, but because the management was inconsistent. Long-term success doesn't come from making heroic predictions or chasing the hottest ideas. It comes from managing risk in a consistent, methodical way, through every cycle, under every condition. Rebalancing dynamically and staying disciplined is the quiet work behind that success. It's not flashy, it's not exciting, but it's effective, and over time, it's what turns a collection of assets into a resilient, compounding machine that survives the unexpected and thrives in the aftermath. So let me leave you with this thought. If you wait until after the crash to think about a hedge, it's too late. The price will have paid already in loss. But if today you set aside that modest 15%, not too much, not too little, you build immunity, you build resilience, and you build a portfolio that not only grows, but survives. That's not fear, that's strategy.